It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. We say hello to foreign editor Christopher Dickey.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you as well, Dov Alfon, editor-at-large for Israeli daily newspaper Haaretz.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us again. Elena Servatas of sister station Radio France International's Russian language service.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being here. And independent reporter Ayşe Gulsert, just back from
Istanbul.
Just back from Istanbul in Turkey. The World This Week, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter. #World This Week. He was truly the last of a generation. Shimon Peres, a mainstay of Israeli politics since independence in 1948. Leaders from around the globe attending his funeral, including the man who was president of the United States when Peres signed the Oslo Accords on the White House lawn back in 1993.
Israel watched him grow first from sort of young genius, doing his best to build undefeatable defense forces, through a long life to become a wise champion of our common humanity. Someone who wanted the best for all children. Yes, the Israeli children, but also the children of his neighbors and the larger world.
Dov Alfon, what struck you with the funeral today?
Really, I got the impression that they came to bid farewell to Shimon Peres, and yet somehow I got the impression that they came also to bid farewell to an idea of Israel, to an old Israel, to the Israel that everybody liked. And now we all understand that it's over. Shimon Peres is only the materialization. His death is the sign that the old Israel, the idea that we all had of Israel, and certainly those statements, this is gone forever. It's an old era, and now this is time for a totally different time.
Yeah, he lived part of the time on a kibbutz. He really went through all the different generations. He was a hawk, then a dove, and then a hawk again, then a dove again.
Yeah, checked it all. He was the symbol of almost everything Israel stands for, and also his interest in science, in the dream. It's not only the Zionist dream. It's last time we met 2 years ago, he was really into these cars without drivers. Is it true that Google makes this? And it's extraordinary to see a man this age and with this record so truly interested in science and nanotechnology and books. But frankly, I think that also it was a time where Israel said, okay, now he's old, so we all love him. Because we tend to forget that when he was in power, he was probably one of the most hated men in Israel, too.
One of the most hated men, Elena Servatas?
It's really very bizarre because I have this romantic image of Shimon Peres, and only when you travel to Israel, you can hear other stories. But today, everybody was united. Clinton said that he was a man with a big heart, a real peace seeker, and so I think the world will keep this image of him. At the same time, when Don saying that the era is different, the reaction of the world is different, because if you remember how was the funeral of Yitzhak Rabin, all the Arab countries were there, and today you just saw Mahmoud Abbas, and that's all. Nobody came. Even parliamentarian from Knesset didn't show up there. It's really strange to me.
Let's pick up on that point. The most notable attendee, a man you don't often see in Jerusalem these days, as Elena was saying, the Palestinian president, presence, by the way, saluted by the current occupant of the White House.
Mr. Netanyahu, members of the Israeli government and the Knesset, heads of state and government, and guests from around the world, including President Abbas, whose presence here is a gesture and a reminder of the unfinished business of peace.
The unfinished business of peace, the death of Shimon Peres triggering more than just the visit by Abbas. There was a handshake with Prime Minister Netanyahu, that's even more of a rarity than a visit to Jerusalem by the Palestinian president.
You know that if we speak about Shimon Peres, we can raise, there's words in Torah, as we say, they say, Adam shelo pal le'aman shalom, Adam shelo shaf le'shalom lokesh et mitziuto. It means that someone who was not looking for peace and not trying to get this peace, he wasted his life. And so today we were just quoting these words very often, and it was really symbolic to see Mahmoud Abbas. But the question is, will they continue, and what's going to be after this shake hand?
Of course, Christopher Dickey, the Shimon Peres that the Independent's Robert Fisk remembered in a column this week is the one that was responsible for the 1996 massacre in South Lebanon on a UN compound. It really is contrasting visions of that.
Well, that's typical of Fisk, too. I mean, there have been many massacres in South Lebanon, and then Peres wasn't responsible for all of them, God knows. I think the problem with Peres is that he wasn't a very good politician, and he could articulate a vision of peace, but it's not just that he couldn't deliver the overall peace settlement. He couldn't deliver the Israeli electorate. He couldn't deliver the government. Peres was never actually elected to a full term as prime minister. He split it once with Yitzhak Shamir, who was not exactly a peacemaker, and he inherited it once from Rabin when Rabin was assassinated.
And then he loses that 96 election by 30,000 votes to Benjamin Netanyahu. Would history have been different if he'd won?
Yes, it would have been different had he won. I mean, Netanyahu was never interested in making the kind of peace that Peres envisioned, but he couldn't get it. He couldn't get elected. I used to know Jordan's King Hussein very well and often talked to him about the Israelis he was dealing with. He really did not like Peres. He loved Rabin, but he didn't like Peres.
Why is that?
Because he felt that Peres would lead him out onto a limb and then saw the limb off behind him, whereas Rabin would deliver what he said he would deliver, compared to Peres.
Well, it's interesting too, because in Turkey, with the funeral of Peres, we're having these little anecdotes that are coming back in relations between Israel and Turkey, and one of them between Peres and then Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Davos in 2009, which is known as the 1-minute incident, where actually there was a conversation about the massacre going on in Gaza at the time, and Erdogan not being very happy with the conversation and leaving the conversation. Now, when you take that incident in 2009, which afterwards the relations between your country and my country have been kind of going from worse to even worse, where ambassadors have been taken off. The trade has been very tricky between the two countries. Then we had the 2010 incident with the Mavi Marmara, with the vessel where almost 10 Turkish citizens lost their lives, and where we asked for pardon. And when you look at it today, actually even today, it's interesting because Israel has just paid $20 million to Turkey in terms of the incident that happened. The compensation, and that in the coming weeks we're going to have new ambassadors coming to the capitals. So it's very interesting. It kind of makes me think of something must die in order for a rebirth, and there's perhaps a rebirth after, let's say, 2009 that is coming on right now between the two countries.
All right, that's the glass half full on bilateral relations between Turkey and Israel. Dov Alfan, let me ask you, though. You said it was, in a way, the funeral for an entire era. Is it also the funeral for the two-state solution, for the dream of a two-state solution?
It certainly looks like that, and still...
Looks like that.
Yeah, do you remember the movie Carrie by the Stephen King bestseller?
A horror movie, yeah.
Yeah, so when I see suddenly Netanyahu in front of Abbas, and there's thousands of cameras and all the world is watching, so I just give him his hand, and it reminds me pretty well the death at the end sequence where suddenly from the grave Shimon Peres pushes Netanyahu toward Abbas, like Kerry, and suddenly there's a change of atmosphere. So it's really a very small thing. The two-state solution is about to be dead. we have maybe 5 years to save it. And maybe this kind of really big events, maybe a different US president, maybe another really world attention, it still can be saved, I believe.
But yeah, and I agree. And also, we are in different times, because I found this interview of 20 years ago that Peres gave to a Turkish TV channel. This is 20 years ago. And I wonder how he would feel, because he said in it, the Islamic world has two options. They will either walk the Turkish democratic secular model or will walk the Iranian model, irrespective of Shiite or Sunni, and fall hostage to Islamic radicalism. So at the time, little did he know that the Turkish model of democracy 20 years ago would be completely different. So the world is not only a different place in terms of a peace process between Palestinians and Israel, but it's also the Middle East is a different, I'm looking at you as a different beast, so to speak, from the Middle East.
Christopher Dickey, one final word. 2 to 5 years, he says, Dov Alfon to...
Oh, I think it's dead. I don't think it's got 2 to 5 years. I think Netanyahu doesn't want it. He's not going to make it happen. He's not going to let it happen. I saw again and again Kerry working incredibly hard, Secretary of State Kerry, working incredibly hard with Abbas, with everybody else to come to a two-state solution, and Netanyahu screwed it every time. So I don't think there's going to be a two-state solution.
And then
I agree with Chris. I will have a beer before it. Everything will be over.
But what is interesting too, Peres remembered years ago a conversation he had at the time with Turkish President Turgut Özal, and apparently in this conversation they talked about when it comes to the Middle East, you're either on the menu or you're one of the guests. I'm sure you remember. And unfortunately, I think with this peace, the dream of a peace going on, the guests are becoming the meals on the menu.
Oh dear. Last week, it was carpet bombing. This week, the Syrian army and its allies followed up with a major ground offensive on Aleppo. Oh, and more bombing as well. After aid convoys and warehouses, homes, and hospitals became fair game, here you see brave relief workers, so-called white helmets, pull a little girl from the rubble in a city of 250,000, reduced to an estimated 30 or so doctors. Ayşegül, sir, you say you're just back from Istanbul. What are the reactions to this?
Well, the thing is that from last time I was here, the new thing is that Turkey has boots on the ground now in terms of Syria. We have an operation going on. So the thing is that everybody has kind of failed in this war going on. I think the Americans have unfortunately failed with the fact that there have been, from the Obama administration, no desire to cross that red line. I think from the European Union too, now with the refugee crisis going and the xenophobia going on. In terms of Turkey, there's a very thin line, because it is being used as a reason to really help bring peace or fight the Islamic State. But what we actually look at the actions is more of a desire from the government to fight the Kurdish rebels than to do anything else.
All right. And the U.S. Secretary of State says he's on the verge of pulling the plug on ceasefire talks. But this Friday, Moscow saying phone lines were still open with Washington. Moscow, which demands that the U.S. separate good rebels from bad ones, and which stands by Assad.
Washington considers the vacuum that now exists insecure. Then what will happen, in Washington's opinion, if the lawfully elected president and the lawful government of this country leave?
It's fair game now, Christopher Dickey, until the next U.S. election? Sorry, till the next inauguration of a U.S. president?
Fair game for, you mean,
for the offensive, for war over peace?
I don't think it's a factor so much of a lame duck. I think it's a factor of not having a policy that can really answer what the Russians are doing. I mean, the Russians and Assad, whatever you can say, they have a coherent policy. It may be evil, it may be horrible, but it is coherent. It's about establishing the authority of a regular government that is recognized in the United Nations, et cetera, et cetera. The United States, who is the United States backing? The United States is backing this rebel group here, this rebel group there. Sometimes they're fighting. We're backing these Kurds. We don't call these Kurds terrorists, but we do call them terrorists when they're the same Kurds fighting in Turkey. It's a completely disjointed kind of situation. I think that in Iraq, things are going relatively well in the war against ISIS, but in Syria, things are going terribly badly. And I don't think that the U.S. has any very good response to the Russians.
Elena,
because they never wanted to give it the real answer, especially now when Obama is about to leave. We will have the only legacy he will bring with him. It will be Iran, Cuba, and I don't know what else.
Healthcare was not bad either.
Yeah.
I think, let me say, I think in many ways Obama's been a very good president, but Syria has been just a disastrous thing to try and deal with. And the policy never really progressed beyond what it was initially. Early in the uprising, the position was Assad is a monster and he's got to go. And it looked like he might go in the face of a popular rebellion, but he didn't. Big mistake. Nobody was going to go in to take him out the way they went in to take out Gaddafi in Libya. Not that that was such a great success. And after Gaddafi, after the failures there, and given the situation on the ground, and given that Turkey for a long time, the most vital ally in the region, was essentially tacitly supporting the Islamic State, when all that was going on, it was just a mess. And I think Obama and his people said, no.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. You're watching The World This Week.